Behind a stripped wall in the Langham Hotel, a workman's chisel hit wood where there should have been brick. In 1991, the panel swung free and the cavity breathed dust and paper, but the papers were not meant to exist. Inside were names, room numbers, and coded phrases Victorian men used when the law called them criminals. If the bundle is authentic, it points to a discreet system of unmarked suites and paid silence, and it drags Oscar Wilde back into the building that some later stories place at the start of his downfall. A palace built to hide people. The Langham was marketed as a triumph of modern comfort, yet its smartest design feature was privacy. When the doors opened on Portland Place in June of 1865, London had never seen anything like it. The building rose 6 stories, dwarfing the Georgian terraces around it. 300 rooms stretched through corridors lined with Turkish carpet. The lobby gleamed with mirrors and gaslight. Hydraulic elevators carried guests upward without effort. This was luxury as technology, comfort as statement. But the real innovation was not what guests could see. It was what they could avoid being seen doing. The architects understood something fundamental about Victorian life. Reputation was currency. Scandal was ruin. And the new wealthy class needed places where public faces could come off without consequence. The Langham offered that. It promised discretion sewn into the walls. The hotel employed 300 staff in its first year. Porters who could forget a face. Maids trained to knock twice and wait. Desk clerks who understood that certain guests preferred initials to surnames. The building taught its workers a language without words. A tilt of the head meant ask no questions. A folded banknote meant remember nothing. Every hallway had 2 routes. The grand stairs for those who wanted to be noticed. The service corridors for those who did not. Guests could enter through the front portico or through side doors that opened onto Langham Street. Carriages could deposit passengers in covered alcoves. The hotel breathed in secrecy and exhaled respectability. The rooms themselves told the story. Standard chambers faced the street, their windows announcing occupancy to Portland Place. But deeper in the floor plan sat suites without numbers on the doors, corner rooms with separate entrances, chambers accessible only through connecting passages. The building was designed like a maze, and that was intentional. The Langham charged rates that only the upper class could afford. A single night in a standard room cost 12 shillings. The suites demanded £2 or more. Those prices bought linen and silver, yes, but they also bought something less tangible. They bought the certainty that staff had been paid enough to care about keeping their positions. Silence, it turned out, had a going rate. London in 1865 was a city learning how to be modern and Victorian at the same time. The population had doubled in 30 years. Railways brought strangers into the center. Gas lamps pushed back the dark. Telegraph wires carried messages across the empire. The old rules of village gossip no longer worked when your neighbor might be anyone. The hotel adapted to that anonymity. It became a place where you could be someone in public and something else in private. Where a member of parliament could meet a journalist without his party knowing. Where a merchant could entertain without his wife asking questions. Where men with careful reputations could take rooms with men they claimed were friends. The Langham understood that privacy was not about keeping secrets. It was about controlling who knew them and when. The building became a vault for ambiguity, a temple to appearances. By 1870, the hotel was hosting royalty and prime ministers. Visiting dignitaries filled the guest book. the Duke of Edinburgh kept rooms on retainer. Mark Twain stayed during his London tours. The Langham was respectable, famous even. But underneath that fame ran a quieter economy. The unspoken arrangements, the predictable patterns, the guests who always requested the same floor, the staff who always worked the same shifts when certain names appeared in the ledger. The building was not innocent, it was complicit, and everyone who walked through its doors understood the bargain. You pay for luxury, you pay for comfort, and if you need it, you pay a little more for forgetting. That was the genius of the Langham. It never advertised what it truly sold. It simply built the architecture of denial and let human nature do the rest. The question was not whether the system would be used. The question was how long it could last before someone noticed. Respectability has a back entrance. In Victorian London, the front door was morality, and the service corridor was reality. The city ran on rules that everyone knew, but no one wrote down. A gentleman did not walk alone after dark in certain neighborhoods. A lady did not travel by cab without a chaperone. A married man did not dine with a woman who was not his wife. The social contract was built on visibility. If no one saw the transgression, it had not happened. The Langham lived in the gap between those rules and the truth. Consider the porter. His name might be Thomas or James or William. He earned 30 shillings a week, enough to feed a family if his wife took in sewing. He worked 12-hour shifts, standing in the lobby watching the door. He memorized faces. He learned which guests tipped and which did not. He understood that his job was not to judge, but to facilitate. When a gentleman arrived with a younger companion, the porter did not ask questions. He signaled to the desk clerk. The clerk checked the reservation book, found the notation in the margin, and produced a key to a room on the 4th floor, rear corridor. The porter carried the luggage. He did not make eye contact with the companion. He accepted the coin pressed into his palm. He descended the stairs and forgot the transaction. That forgetting was labor. It required discipline. A porter who gossiped lost his position. A clerk who showed surprise lost credibility. The hotel ran on a currency of practiced blindness. The staff existed in a strange position. They saw everything and were allowed to know nothing. They moved through private spaces, changing linens that told stories, emptying bins that held evidence. They were present for moments of intimacy and rage and fear, and they were expected to vanish the instant they became inconvenient. This created a hierarchy of complicity. Senior staff earned more because they could be trusted with more. A head housekeeper who had worked at the Langham for 10 years was worth her weight in discretion. She knew which rooms had connecting doors. She knew which guests requested that maids not enter before noon. She knew the rhythm of arrivals and departures that indicated someone was living 2 lives, and she kept that knowledge locked behind professional courtesy until it became valuable. Because secrets had markets. A servant who lost her position might visit a scandal sheet with information to sell. A porter dismissed without reference might find his memory suddenly sharp when a journalist offered coin. The hotel understood this. It paid well enough to make betrayal expensive. It offered references that opened doors elsewhere. It built loyalty through calculated generosity. But not every loyalty could be bought. The lower ranks, the scullery maids and boot boys and coal men, they had less to lose. They saw fragments. A name heard through a door, a torn letter in a fireplace, a bottle left on a tray. They could not always interpret what they witnessed, but they could repeat it. That was how gossip spread. Not through malice, but through the servant network. A maid at the Langham mentioned something to her sister who worked for a family in Belgravia. That sister repeated it to a cook who told a story at the market. The information traveled like water, finding cracks. The hotel tried to control this. Staff were forbidden from discussing guests outside the building. Contracts included clauses about confidentiality. Termination was immediate and without appeal. But enforcement was impossible. You could fire a maid for talking, but you could not unhear what she said, so the Langham relied on something else. Ambiguity. The hotel made sure that servants never saw the complete picture. A porter knew a guest arrived, but not who they met. A maid knew a room was occupied, but not by whom. The information was fragmented, diluted, useless, except when it was not. The real danger came from the professionals who existed outside the hotel's control. The cab drivers who waited on Portland Place, watching who came and went. The messenger boys who delivered notes to rooms and might glance at an address. The private investigators hired by suspicious wives or vindictive rivals. These people had no loyalty to the Langham. They collected details and sold them to whoever paid. And then there were the blackmailers, men who made careers from fear. They haunted the edges of places like the Langham, cataloging vulnerabilities. They did not need proof. They only needed enough truth to make a threat credible. A blackmailer might approach a guest months after a stay. He would mention dates, room numbers, descriptions vague enough to be anyone, but specific enough to sound real. He would ask for money to forget, and the guest would pay, because even the accusation could destroy them. The hotel could not prevent this. It could only try to limit exposure. That meant keeping records clean. That meant training staff to reveal nothing. That meant creating systems where paper trails vanished. But every system has a flaw, and the flaw in the Langham's design was human. People remember, people talk, people leave evidence. The question was not whether secrets could be kept. The question was how much it cost to keep them and who was willing to pay. Luxury learns the price of silence. Every bell rung for a private suite carried an invisible fee, and everyone knew who was paying it. By 1875, the Langham had refined its operations to an art. The building processed 800 guests a week during the height of the social season. Occupancy rates reached 90% in summer. Revenue exceeded £60,000 annually. The hotel was a machine for converting discretion into profit, but that profit came with overhead that never appeared in ledgers. Consider the cost of loyalty. A porter earned 30 shillings weekly, but the ones who worked the late shift, who saw the guests who arrived after 10 in the evening and left before dawn, those porters received an extra crown per week. Not officially. The money came from a fund managed by the head concierge, sourced from gratuities and occasional supplements from management. The payment bought reliability. The maids who serviced the unmarked suites received similar arrangements. They worked in pairs, never alone, and never the same pair twice in a row. This prevented intimacy, familiarity, judgment. It also prevented witnesses. If questioned, a maid could honestly say she did not know who stayed in room 417. She had cleaned it, yes, but she had not seen the occupant. Someone else made the bed while she emptied the grates. The desk clerks operated under different rules. They kept 2 sets of books. The official register recorded names, arrival dates, and departure dates. Every guest signed it. The book sat on the front desk, visible to anyone who cared to look. This was the public record, the proof that the Langham maintained proper documentation. But behind the desk, in a locked drawer, sat a second book, smaller, bound in plain leather. This one recorded the guests who paid extra for initials instead of names. The BUE arrangements made by telegram or messenger rather than in person. The suites reserved 3 months in advance by solicitors acting on behalf of unnamed clients. This book was the map of secrecy, and only 3 people had keys to the drawer: the head clerk, the hotel manager, and the owner. The entries were cryptic, room numbers followed by codes. JS with AB might mean 2 men sharing a suite. The notation paid through might indicate that charges went to a third-party account. The abbreviation usual services could mean anything from extra towels to arrangements that never appeared on a bill. The system worked because it operated in plain sight while remaining invisible. A guest who wanted privacy simply requested it. The clerk understood. The room was prepared. The charges adjusted. Nothing was suspicious because nothing was ever stated, but the arrangement created liabilities. Every person who knew the system was a potential weakness. Every entry in the hidden ledger was evidence that could destroy reputations. The hotel was building an archive of vulnerability, and someone had to manage that risk. The hotel destroyed records on a schedule. Every quarter, the second ledger was reviewed. Entries older than 6 months were copied into a summary document that removed identifying details. Then the original pages were burned. The summary was locked in a safe in the manager's office. This created deniability. If questioned, the hotel could produce records showing rooms were rented, but could not say to whom. The paper trail dissolved into generality. Except destruction requires trust. The clerk who copied the entries saw everything. The manager who locked the safe knew what it contained. The owner who paid for the system understood its purpose. Each of them could betray the others. Each of them could sell the information or use it for leverage. So the hotel built insurance. It promoted staff from within, creating careers that depended on the Langham's success, paid pensions to retired workers, ensuring silence long after they left. It spread the knowledge across enough people that no single person could reconstruct the complete system. This was not morality, it was risk management. London in 1880 was a city of 2 million people, served by 100 hotels. The Langham was one of the largest, but it was not alone in offering discretion. The Savoy, the Midland Grand, the Great Western, they all had similar arrangements. This was simply how the industry worked when your clientele included members of parliament, foreign dignitaries, and wealthy men whose public lives required private escapes. The difference was scale. The Langham processed more guests. It charged higher rates. It attracted a clientele with more to lose. That made the stakes higher. It also made the profits larger. A standard room cost 15 shillings a night by 1880. A suite with sitting room commanded £3. But a suite with privacy guarantees, with staff who knew to be absent, with records that could be edited, those rooms fetched £5 or more. The premium for secrecy was enormous. The hotel thrived on that premium. It expanded. A new wing opened in 1879, adding 80 rooms. The kitchens were enlarged. The staff grew to 400. The Langham was becoming a landmark, a destination, a symbol of London's arrival as a global capital. And beneath that success ran the same bargain. Pay us enough and we will protect you. Pay us more and we will forget you existed. Pay us everything and we will destroy the proof that you were here. It was a system that could not last. Not because it was immoral, but because it depended on silence in a city that made money from talk. Journalists prowled for scandal. Reformers campaigned for virtue. Police enforced laws that made private acts criminal. The Langham had built a fortress of discretion, but fortresses fall when someone opens the gate. And in 1885, the law changed and the gate swung wide. The unmarked suites and the ledger. The story says there were rooms without names and records that existed only so they could be burned. The 1991 discovery claim has never been fully verified. According to reports, renovation workers at the Langham found a panel behind the wall of a service corridor on the 4th floor. The panel concealed a cavity approximately 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall. Inside the cavity, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of papers. The papers allegedly contained names, guest lists from the 1880s and 90s, room assignments, dates of arrival and departure, and notations in a shorthand that suggested payments for services not listed on official hotel bills. If the documents were authentic, they represented a smoking gun, physical evidence of the system that rumor had always suggested, proof that the hotel maintained records of guests who paid for anonymity, which meant the anonymity was an illusion. But the documents vanished. By the time historians and archivists asked to examine them, the hotel could not produce them. Workers who allegedly saw the papers could not be located. Photographs were never taken. The discovery became a story without evidence, a legend built on absence. So the question is not what the papers said. The question is whether they ever existed at all. Consider the timing. 1991 was the height of a major renovation. The Langham had closed for refurbishment after years of decline. Workers stripped walls, replaced plumbing, gutted entire floors. In that chaos, anything could be found, or anything could be claimed and never proven. The hotel had good reason to deny the documents. By 1991, the Langham was rebuilding its reputation as a luxury destination. Revealing that it had once maintained secret records of illegal liaisons would damage that brand. Easier to dismiss the story as rumor, easier to say nothing was found. But the hotel also had reason to preserve the documents. They were history. They were evidence of how Victorian society actually operated, beneath the surface of respectability. They could be archived, sealed, and released after enough time had passed that everyone involved was dead. Or they could be destroyed. Not in 1991, but decades earlier, when the laws changed, when the scandals broke, when keeping the records became more dangerous than destroying them. The real ledger, the one that supposedly existed in the 1880s, would have been a liability from the moment it was written. Every name in it was a target for blackmail. Every date was proof of presence. Every payment notation was evidence of conspiracy. Hotels did keep records, they had to. Tax authorities required documentation of revenue. Insurance companies demanded proof of occupancy. Auditors reviewed books to verify expenses. A hotel the size of the Langham could not operate without creating paper trails. But there were ways to record information that left room for interpretation. A guest list might show that room 417 was occupied from March 10th to March 15th, but not show the occupant's name. A revenue ledger might show that £5 was paid for suite accommodation, but not show who paid it. The records were technically complete while remaining functionally useless for anyone trying to reconstruct who stayed where. The shorthand notations would have been the truly dangerous entries. Abbreviations only staff understood, codes that indicated which guests received special handling. marks that showed which rooms were part of the discreet system. If such records existed, they would have been kept separate from the official books, locked away, accessible only to senior management, and they would have been reviewed regularly to decide what could safely be destroyed and what needed to be preserved for operational continuity. Destruction would have been methodical, a page at a time fed into the fireplace in the manager's office, or entire ledgers burned in the hotel's furnaces where coal fires already blazed. The paper would vanish into ash. The information would dissolve into memory, except memory fails, and people talk, and sometimes, in moments of conscience or malice or simple carelessness, someone keeps a copy, hides it, forgets where they put it, and decades later, a renovation crew knocks through a wall and finds what was meant to stay lost. That is the charitable interpretation. The other interpretation is simpler. Someone fabricated the story. A worker looking for attention. A tabloid journalist inventing content. A hotel employee creating a legend to make the building more interesting. The Langham benefits either way. If the documents were real, the hotel can claim ignorance. If they were fake, the hotel gains mystique. The story circulates. People wonder. The building acquires a shadow history that makes it famous for more than chandeliers and afternoon tea. But here is what we know for certain. Victorian hotels did maintain systems for protecting wealthy guests. Discretion was a service, purchased like any other. Staff were trained. Records were managed. Silence was commodified. The Langham was not unique in this. It was simply successful at it. The building's design, its location, its clientele, all created the perfect conditions for secrecy as a business model. And if the hotel kept detailed records of that business, even for internal use, those records would have become catastrophically dangerous the moment anyone famous was arrested. Every name in the ledger would suddenly be a potential co-conspirator. Every notation would be evidence. The smart move would have been to destroy everything, burn the books, dismiss the staff who knew too much, rewrite the hotel's history as a place where nothing untoward ever happened. But people are not always smart. They are sentimental. They are cautious. They hedge their bets. They hide documents instead of destroying them, thinking they might need proof someday. And those hidden documents wait in walls until someone finds them, or until someone claims to have found them, which is where the story becomes impossible to verify. We are left with rumor, suggestion, the ghost of evidence. The ledger, real or imagined, haunts the Langham. It represents the possibility that the truth was documented, that somewhere, written in ink and coded shorthand, the hotel confessed to exactly what it was. Not a palace of luxury, a marketplace of silence. And if that ledger existed, it recorded more than just rooms and dates. It recorded the moment when respectability became a performance, when privacy became a product, when human need met institutional complicity. It recorded the price of being allowed to exist. That is what makes the story matter, even if the papers never existed. The ledger is a metaphor for what we know happened, but cannot prove. The hotel kept secrets. Some secrets were written down, and written things can be found. Police, blackmailers, and paid forgetting. When the law policed private desire, criminals were not only lovers, but also witnesses and extortionists. In 1885, the British Parliament passed the Criminal Law Amendment Act. Section 11 made any act of gross indecency between men a criminal offense, punishable by up to 2 years of hard labor. The law was vague by design. It did not require proof of a specific act. It only required evidence that something improper had occurred. Suspicion became sufficient. The effect was immediate. Arrests for gross indecency rose from fewer than 10 per year in the early 1880s to more than 40 per year by 1890. Prosecutions followed. The courts became theaters for moral judgment. Newspapers printed trial transcripts. Names were published. Reputations were destroyed whether the accused were convicted or not. The law created a trap. Before 1885, private behavior was difficult to prosecute. Afterward, privacy itself became evidence. Two men sharing a hotel room, a landlady's testimony about visitors, a letter found in a coat pocket, all of it could be used to build a case. The Metropolitan Police assigned officers to patrol areas known for illicit meetings, parks after dark, public lavatories, streets near certain hotels. The officers worked undercover, posing as potential partners to gather evidence. Entrapment was legal. The goal was arrests, not justice. This turned intimacy into a prosecutable crime and made everyone involved vulnerable. Not just the men in the rooms, but the hotel staff who rented them the rooms, the cab drivers who brought them there, the witnesses who saw them enter. Blackmail flourished in this environment. The law made fear profitable. A blackmailer needed very little to be effective. He did not need photographs or signed confessions. He only needed plausibility, a name, a date, a location. Then he would write a letter. The letter would be polite. It would mention that the writer had information that might be of interest to the police. It would suggest that a payment could ensure the information remained private. The victim faced a terrible choice: pay and admit guilt or refuse and risk prosecution. Most paid. The amounts varied. £10 to make a letter disappear, £50 for ongoing silence, £100 to buy a blackmailer's entire archive. The payments were often staged, an initial demand to test willingness, then escalating requests as the blackmailer realized how much the victim would pay. The extortion could continue for years, draining wealth and nerve. Hotels were perfect hunting grounds for blackmailers. Guests came and went. Records existed, but could be ambiguous. Staff saw things but might not remember details. A blackmailer could claim knowledge he did not have, relying on the victim's fear to make the threat credible. The Langham became a target precisely because of its reputation for discretion. Blackmailers knew that men who paid extra for unmarked suites and reliable silence were men with something to hide. They loitered on Portland Place, watching who entered. They bribed porters for information. They befriended cab drivers who serviced the hotel. The hotel tried to fight back. Management warned staff not to speak with strangers asking about guests. Porters were instructed to report suspicious inquiries. The hotel even hired private investigators to identify known blackmailers and bar them from the premises. But the problem was structural. You could not run a business based on discretion and then prevent people from exploiting that discretion. The same systems that protected guests made them vulnerable. The same records that allowed the hotel to manage clients became evidence that blackmailers could reference. And the police were no help. Officers could arrest blackmailers, but that required victims to testify. And victims would not testify because doing so meant admitting in court the very things the blackmailer had threatened to reveal. The law protected blackmailers through the silence of their victims. Some blackmailers were professionals, men who made livings from fear. They kept files. They tracked patterns. They knew which neighborhoods to watch, which hotels to monitor, which clients to target. These men were businesslike. They set prices. They honored agreements. They understood that a victim who paid regularly was more valuable than a victim destroyed. Others were opportunists, servants fired for theft who sold gossip to recoup losses, desperate men who stumbled onto information and tried to monetize it. These blackmailers were dangerous because they were unpredictable. They did not understand the value of discretion. They made threats they could not follow through on. They escalated recklessly. And then there were the moralists, people who blackmailed not for money, but for control. They wanted to punish. They wanted to expose. They wanted to force their victims into humiliating confessions. These were the most dangerous blackmailers because they could not be bought off. The hotel could not protect guests from any of this. It could manage information, yes. It could train staff to reveal nothing. But it could not prevent a blackmailer from writing a letter based on rumor. It could not stop a prosecution built on circumstantial evidence. What the hotel could do was destroy records. If the police came with a warrant, the hotel needed to be able to say that it kept only the official register, that any other documents had been lost, that the staff did not remember details. This required preparation. The manager conducted regular audits. Every 6 months, he reviewed which documents existed and which needed to vanish. The second ledger, the one with coded entries, was copied and then burned. The copies were stored off premises in a solicitor's office under client privilege protections. This made them legally inaccessible without breaching attorney secrecy. Staff were rotated. Porters who worked the late shifts were moved to morning duties after a year. Maids who serviced the unmarked suites were promoted to supervisory roles where they no longer entered guest rooms. This fragmented memory. No one person could testify about long-term patterns. The hotel also settled complaints quietly. If a guest accused staff of indiscretion, the staff member was dismissed without investigation. If a blackmail letter mentioned the hotel by name, management contacted the blackmailer and negotiated, not on behalf of the guest, but on behalf of the building's reputation. The hotel paid for its own silence. This created a strange economy. Guests paid the hotel for privacy. The hotel paid staff for loyalty. Blackmailers extracted payment from guests. Guests sometimes paid the hotel to intervene with blackmailers. Everyone was paying everyone else, and the currency was always the same: secrecy. But secrecy is not sustainable. It is a resource that depletes. Every person who knows something is a leak waiting to happen. Every document is evidence waiting to surface. Every payment is proof of guilt. The question was never whether the system would fail. The question was what would trigger the failure: a careless servant, a vengeful blackmailer, a police raid, or something worse. A scandal so large that no amount of money could contain it. A name so famous that silence was impossible. A trial so public that every hotel in London would be scrutinized. That trigger was coming, and when it arrived, the Langham would have to choose. Protect the system or protect itself. A young lord lights the fuse. Oscar Wilde did not need the Langham to be reckless. He only needed London to be listening. By 1891, Wilde was famous. His plays ran in the West End. His wit was quoted in drawing rooms. His aesthetic philosophy shaped fashion. He was charming, brilliant, married with 2 children, and widely admired. He was also living a life that the law had made criminal. Wilde met Lord Alfred Douglas in the summer of 1891. Douglas was 21 years old, beautiful, reckless, and the 3rd son of the Marquis of Queensberry. The 2 men became inseparable. They dined together. They traveled together. They appeared at parties and premieres with a closeness that some found charming and others found suspicious. The relationship was not hidden, but it was not explained. Wilde introduced Douglas as a friend. Douglas called Wilde his mentor. Society nodded and pretended not to notice that the friendship looked like something else. This was the bargain Victorian London offered. You could live as you wished, as long as you maintained appearances. You could have intimate friendships, as long as you did not call them what they were. You could occupy the gray areas, as long as you did not force anyone to acknowledge them. Wilde understood this. He had navigated it for years. But he also chafed at it. His art celebrated truth. His essays argued for authenticity. His entire public persona was built on refusing to pretend. And Douglas made pretending impossible. He was loud where Wilde was subtle. He was indiscreet where Wilde was careful. He wrote poems that were barely coded. He paraded his affections. He dared anyone to object. Wilde was drawn to that recklessness. It matched something in his own nature. The part of him that wanted to stop performing respectability, that wanted to live openly, consequences be damned. But consequences were guaranteed. The Criminal Law Amendment Act made their relationship prosecutable. Letters they exchanged could be used as evidence. Witnesses who saw them together could testify. Hotel registers could place them in the same rooms. Wilde's friends warned him. They suggested discretion. They pointed out that Douglas was trouble, that his family was dangerous, that the association would end badly. Wilde ignored them, or perhaps he did not care. He was at the peak of his success. He believed he was untouchable. He was wrong. Douglas's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, was a brutal man. He was known for his temper, his violence, and his hatred of anything he considered unmanly. He had disowned one son for converting to Catholicism. He had publicly insulted another. When he learned about his son's relationship with Wilde, he decided to destroy both of them. Queensberry began following them. He appeared at places they frequented. He confronted Wilde in restaurants. He sent threatening letters. He hired private investigators to gather evidence. He was preparing for war. Wilde tried to ignore him. He continued his public life. His plays succeeded. The importance of being earnest opened to acclaim in February 1895. Critics called it brilliant. Audiences adored it. Wilde was at his highest moment. But Queensberry was patient. He waited for the right opportunity. And on February 14th, 1895, he went to Wilde's club, the Albemarle, and left a calling card with a message scrawled across it. The message read, "To Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." The misspelling did not matter. The accusation was clear, and it was public. The card was left with the porter. Other club members saw it. The words could not be taken back. Wilde faced a choice. He could ignore the card and hope the scandal faded. Or he could prosecute Queensberry for libel. His friends begged him to do nothing. They argued that a trial would give Queensberry a platform to air accusations, that the defense would dig into Wilde's life, that even if Wilde won, he would lose. But Wilde was furious. He had been insulted publicly. His reputation had been attacked, and he believed he could win. Queensberry had written the accusation. That was defamatory. Wilde could prove it was untrue, or at least he could perform that proof in court. So he sued, and the moment he filed the case, the trap closed. Queensberry hired the best lawyers. He instructed them to find evidence, and they found it. They located young men who claimed to have been paid for time with Wilde. They gathered letters. They interviewed hotel staff. They built a case that Wilde was exactly what Queensberry had accused him of being. The trial became a spectacle. Newspapers covered every session. Wilde's words were quoted. His lifestyle was dissected. His art was used against him. What had been a libel case became a trial of Wilde's character, and the hotels came up. Not the Langham specifically, but places like it. The lawyers asked about rooms rented under false names, about young men brought to suites, about payments made for silence. The entire system of Victorian discretion was laid bare. Wilde tried to defend himself with wit. He turned questions into jokes. He sparred with the prosecution, but the evidence was overwhelming. On April 5th, 1895, Wilde withdrew the libel case. Queensberry was acquitted, and the prosecution immediately moved against Wilde. Within hours, Wilde was arrested. The charge was gross indecency. The evidence was everything that had been presented in the libel trial. And this time, Wilde was the defendant. The public turned. The same society that had celebrated him now demanded his punishment. His name was removed from theater marquees. His books were pulled from shops. Friends abandoned him. He was radioactive. 2 more trials followed. The first ended in a hung jury. The second ended in conviction. On May 25th, 1895, Oscar Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. The sentence destroyed him. Prison broke his health. The labor was brutal. He was isolated, humiliated, reduced. The man who had been London's most celebrated wit was now a cautionary tale, and every place that had sheltered him scrambled to distance itself. Hotels reviewed their records. Staff were questioned. Any connection to Wilde was scrubbed. The system that had allowed him to live his life now erased him from its history. The Langham, if it had hosted Wilde or Douglas, or anyone connected to them, would have felt the pressure. Records would have been checked. Entries would have been removed. The hotel's management would have made sure that nothing connected them to the scandal. Because the scandal did not just destroy Wilde. It exposed the architecture of complicity. It showed how hotels facilitated secrets, how staff were trained to forget, how money bought silence. And suddenly, that silence was criminal. Every hotel that had operated the way the Langham operated was now vulnerable. Not to prosecution, perhaps, but to scandal, to accusation, to the suggestion that they had enabled illegal behavior. The smart move was to destroy evidence, burn records, dismiss witnesses, rewrite history. And that is almost certainly what happened. Not because hotels were covering up specific crimes, but because they were protecting themselves from association. Wilde went to prison. His reputation was annihilated. His family changed their name. His wife fled to Europe with their children. He was ruined so completely that it became a template. This is what happens when you refuse to hide. But the real lesson was not about Wilde. It was about the system, about what happens when privacy becomes evidence, when discretion becomes conspiracy, when the architecture that protects you can be used to prosecute you. The Langham survived. It remained open. It remained successful, but it learned. After 1895, the hotel became more careful, more paranoid, more willing to sacrifice individuals to protect the institution. That was the legacy of the Wilde trials. Not reform, but fear. Not justice, but erasure. The hotel did not stop offering discretion. It just made sure there was no proof that it ever had. Queensberry's card on a silver tray or we seen Treinkornbein. Single accusation, delivered with aristocratic certainty, turned whispers into a weapon. The calling card was small, 3 inches by 2 inches, standard stock, nothing remarkable. But the words written across it might as well have been carved in stone, to Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite. The Marquis of Queensberry had intended to deliver it personally, but when he found Wilde absent from the Albemarle Club, he left it with the porter. The date was February 14th, 1895, Valentine's Day. The irony was lost on no one. Wilde received the card 4 days later. He had been traveling, and when he returned to the club, the porter handed it to him with visible discomfort. Wilde read it. His reaction, according to those present, was fury, not fear, not caution, rage. He could have torn it up. He could have laughed it off. He could have disappeared to Europe for 6 months until the scandal faded. His friends begged him to do exactly that. Robert Ross, one of his oldest confidants, argued that Queensberry was trying to provoke him, that the smart move was silence. But Wilde was done with silence. He had spent years navigating Victorian hypocrisy, performing respectability while living a life that made him criminal. He was tired, and he was at the peak of his fame. He believed that fame was armor. He consulted a solicitor. The solicitor reviewed the card and confirmed that it was defamatory. Queensberry had accused Wilde of a crime. Wilde could sue for libel. If he won, Queensberry would be fined, possibly imprisoned, and Wilde's reputation would be restored. The solicitor did not mention the obvious risk, that Queensberry would defend the case by proving the accusation true, that a libel defense required evidence, that Wilde would be inviting the Marquis to drag every secret into court. Wilde filed the case on March 1st. The trial was set for April 3rd. That gave Queensberry 5 weeks to prepare. He used every day. Queensberry hired private investigators. They combed through Wilde's life. They interviewed young men who had been seen with him. They visited hotels where Wilde had stayed. They offered money for information. They built dossiers. The evidence they gathered was devastating, not because it proved specific illegal acts, but because it created a pattern. Hotel registers showing Wilde renting rooms with young men who were not his sons. Witnesses who claimed Wilde had given them gifts, money, or clothing. Letters in Wilde's handwriting that used language dripping with affection and desire. The letters were the worst. Wilde wrote beautifully. He was incapable of restraint when expressing emotion. His correspondence with Douglas was full of passion, poetry, and implication. Taken individually, the letters might have been dismissed as artistic exaggeration. Collected together, they were evidence. Queensberry's lawyers also investigated the hotels. They wanted to know which establishments Wilde frequented, which rooms he preferred, whether staff remembered him, whether there were complaints or irregularities. The Savoy came up. Wilde had stayed there multiple times. The hotel confirmed his reservations, but provided no additional details. The staff, when questioned, remembered nothing unusual. This was standard. Hotels protected clients. But the lawyers noted the patterns anyway. The Langham may have come up as well. Douglas had connections to the hotel through family. If Wilde and Douglas had used the Langham for private meetings, it would have been logical. But no record surfaced during the trial. Either they never existed, or the hotel had already destroyed them. The trial began on April 3rd, 1895. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the gallery. Wilde's friends attended, anxious and quiet. Queensberry sat in the defendant's box, confident and ready. The prosecution opened by arguing that Queensberry's accusation was defamatory and false. Wilde took the stand to testify to his good character. He was witty, evasive, and overly clever. He turned questions into jokes. He performed brilliance. It was a mistake. The defense lawyer, Edward Carson, was methodical. He began by asking Wilde about his art, about the themes in his writing, about characters who broke social rules. Wilde defended his work passionately. He argued that art was immoral, that it explored life without judging it. Carson then shifted to Wilde's personal life. He asked about his friendships with young men, about gifts he had given them, about letters he had written. Wilde tried to deflect. He claimed the relationships were intellectual, that he was a mentor to struggling artists. Carson produced evidence, letters, testimonies from young men who described receiving money from Wilde, hotel staff who remembered Wilde bringing guests to his rooms. The details piled up. Wilde's wit failed him. He became defensive. He contradicted himself. He admitted things he should have denied and denied things that were obviously true. The performance fell apart. On April 5th, Wilde's lawyers advised him to withdraw the case. They could see where it was going. Queensberry would be acquitted, and the evidence presented during the trial would give prosecutors everything they needed to charge Wilde himself. Wilde collapsed the case. Queensberry walked free. The judge awarded him costs, and within hours, a warrant was issued for Wilde's arrest. Wilde's friends found him at the Cadogan Hotel. They urged him to leave the country. A boat to France was waiting. He could be across the channel before the police found him. He would lose everything in England, but he would be free. Wilde refused. He was paralyzed. He had spent his entire life building a public identity. That identity required presence. Running meant admitting guilt. It meant living in exile. He could not do it. The police arrived at 6 in the evening. They took him to Bow Street Station. He was charged with gross indecency. The trial was scheduled for April 26th. The city exploded. Newspapers printed every detail. Wilde's name was everywhere. Theaters dropped his plays. Publishers canceled his books. His friends abandoned him publicly, even as some worked privately to help. The first trial ended in a hung jury. One member refused to convict. The prosecution immediately scheduled a second trial. Wilde was released on bail, but no hotel would take him. His brother arranged lodging in an obscure boarding house. Wilde was a pariah. The second trial began in May. The prosecution refined its case. It brought more witnesses. It introduced more letters. It painted Wilde as a corrupter of youth. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that friendships were not crimes, that the prosecution was persecuting art. The jury did not care. On May 25th, they convicted Wilde on multiple counts of gross indecency. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of hard labor. The maximum penalty. Wilde was taken to Pentonville Prison, then transferred to Wandsworth, and finally to Reading Jail. The labor broke him. The isolation destroyed him. He wrote one long letter during his imprisonment, later published as De Profundis. It was a meditation on suffering, regret, and the cost of honesty. He was released in May 1897. He left England immediately and never returned. He lived his last 3 years in France using the name Sebastian Melmoth. He was poor, sick, and forgotten. He died in November 1900 at age 46. The trials did not just destroy Wilde. They terrified everyone who had lived like him, every man who had taken risks, every person who had relied on discretion. The message was clear. If Wilde, famous and brilliant and wealthy, could be ruined, so could anyone. Hotels panicked. The Langham, like every establishment that had offered private suites and paid silence, realized it was sitting on evidence. guest registers, staff, memories, coded ledgers. All of it could be subpoenaed. All of it could be used to prosecute clients or implicate the hotel in conspiracy. The smart move was destruction. Burn the records, dismiss the staff who knew too much, rewrite the history, and that is what happened. Not because the hotels were ashamed, but because they were afraid. The Wilde trials did not reform Victorian morality. They weaponized it. They turned privacy into evidence and discretion into guilt. They made it clear that the law could reach into any room, any relationship, any life. And they made the Langham and every hotel like it realize that secrecy was not a product anymore. It was a liability. The business model had to change. Or at least, it had to become invisible. 3 trials, 1 reputation, no mercy. In the courtroom, language becomes a knife, and every joke you ever made is suddenly evidence. The first trial lasted 6 days. The prosecution called dozens of witnesses. Young men testified that Wilde had befriended them, given them gifts, and invited them to hotels. They described dinners, champagne, private rooms. They did not need to say what happened next. The implication was enough. Wilde's defense argued that the relationships were innocent, that Wilde was a generous man who supported struggling artists, that the prosecution was twisting charity into crime, but the letters undermined that defense. Wilde's correspondence was read aloud in court. Phrases like "your slim gilt soul" and "red rose lips" were dissected. The defense argued they were artistic. The prosecution argued they were confessions. The jury deadlocked. On May 1st, 1895, the judge declared a mistrial. Wilde was released on bail. He had 3 weeks before the second trial. He should have fled. Every friend who still spoke to him urged it. France had no extradition treaty for gross indecency. He would be safe. Poor, perhaps, but free. Wilde refused. He was either too paralyzed by shock or too convinced that England would vindicate him. Either way, he stayed. The second trial began on May 21st. The prosecution sharpened its case. It called hotel staff as witnesses. They testified about rooms rented, about young men seen entering, about requests for meals to be delivered privately. The defense tried to cast doubt, but the pattern was damning. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. On May 25th, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge addressed Wilde directly. He called the crimes the worst he had encountered. He said the sentence was inadequate for the offense. He sentenced Wilde to 2 years of hard labor. Wilde swayed in the dock. He was 40 years old. He had been famous, wealthy, celebrated. Now he was a convict. The guards led him down to the cells. Within days, he was transferred to Pentonville Prison. Hard labor meant exactly that. Prisoners walked treadmills for hours. They broke rocks. They picked oakum, pulling apart old rope until their fingers bled. The work served no purpose beyond punishment. It was designed to break men physically and mentally. Wilde was not equipped for it. He had lived a life of luxury. His body was soft. His hands had never done manual work. The labor destroyed him. Within weeks, he was losing weight. His health collapsed. He suffered infections, dysentery, and partial hearing loss from an untreated ear infection. The isolation was worse. Prisoners were forbidden to speak. Meals were eaten in silence. Exercise was conducted alone. Wilde, who had built his life on conversation, was locked in a soundless world. He later wrote that the deprivation of human contact was torture, that he would have preferred physical pain. The authorities moved him twice, first to Wandsworth, then to Reading Jail. Each transfer was a public spectacle. Prisoners were handcuffed and marched through train stations. Crowds gathered to watch. People jeered. Wilde stood on the platform in his prison uniform while strangers mocked him. At Reading, the conditions improved slightly. The governor, Major Nelson, was more humane than most. He allowed Wilde books. He permitted writing materials. Wilde used them to draft a long letter to Douglas. The letter became De Profundis, a meditation on love, suffering, and betrayal. It was his attempt to make sense of what had happened. In the letter, Wilde blamed Douglas for the disaster. He argued that Douglas's recklessness had drawn Queensberry's wrath, that Douglas's selfishness had prevented Wilde from fleeing, that the entire catastrophe stemmed from Douglas's inability to consider consequences. But Wilde also blamed himself. He wrote about hubris, about believing he was immune to scandal, about choosing spectacle over safety. He acknowledged that he had courted disaster, that he had refused to hide, that his honesty had been both his art and his destruction. De Profundis was not published during Wilde's lifetime. It circulated privately after his death. It became a text about suffering and resilience. But it was also a document of rage. Wilde had been destroyed, and he wanted someone to blame. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Wilde's plays continued to be performed, but without his name attached. Producers credited them to anonymous authors. Audiences enjoyed them without knowing who wrote them. Wilde's art survived. Wilde himself did not. His wife, Constance, changed her name and moved to Europe with their 2 sons. She never saw Wilde again. She died in 1898, while Wilde was still imprisoned. He was not told until months later. The news broke him further. Wilde was released on May 19, 1897. He had served the full sentence. The prison gave him £5 and a train ticket. He crossed to France the same day. He never returned to England. Exile was not freedom. Wilde was infamous. Hotels turned him away. Friends avoided him. He lived on charity and dwindling savings. He adopted the pseudonym Sebastian Melmoth after the protagonist of a Gothic novel about a man who makes a pact with the devil. The name was fitting. He tried to write. He produced The Ballad of Reading Gaol, a poem about his prison experience. It was published anonymously and sold moderately well, but Wilde could not sustain the work. His health was ruined. His spirit was broken. He had no money and no prospects. He spent his final years wandering between Paris and Italy. He lived in cheap hotels. He drank heavily. He saw Douglas again briefly, a reunion that ended in bitterness. He wrote letters begging friends for money. Some sent it, others did not reply. On November 30th, 1900, Wilde died in a shabby hotel room in Paris. The cause was cerebral meningitis, likely stemming from the untreated ear infection he had suffered in prison. He was 46 years old. Only a handful of people attended his funeral. The newspapers reported his death without sympathy. They called him a cautionary tale. A man of talent destroyed by vice. The obituaries did not mention his plays. They focused on the scandal. But Wilde's destruction accomplished something he had not intended. It exposed the machinery of Victorian morality. The trial showed how society policed private life, how the law could be used as a weapon, how fame offered no protection from moral panic. The trials also revealed the complicity of institutions, hotels, clubs, businesses that profited from discretion. The Langham was not named during the proceedings, but hotels like it were implicated. The evidence discussed included rented rooms, paid silence, and staff trained to forget. The entire system of Victorian privacy was laid bare. After Wilde's conviction, hotels scrambled to cover themselves. Records were reviewed. Staff were reminded of confidentiality agreements. Any documentation that might link the hotel to illegal activity was destroyed. This was not guilt, it was risk management. The Wilde case had shown that enabling privacy could be prosecuted as conspiracy. The trials did not just punish Wilde. They sent a message to everyone who lived in the margins, to everyone who relied on discretion. The message was clear: you are not safe. Your privacy is evidence. Your secrets are crimes waiting to be discovered. Wilde understood this. In De Profundis, he wrote that society did not punish him for what he did. It punished him for forcing it to acknowledge what it already knew, for refusing to pretend, for living honestly in a world built on hypocrisy. That honesty cost him everything: his freedom, his health, his family, his reputation, his life. But it also made him a martyr, a symbol of what happens when you refuse to hide. The Langham survived the Wilde scandal because it did hide. It erased its connections. It destroyed evidence. It became respectable by forgetting everything it had been. That is the legacy of the trials. Not justice, not reform, just fear. And the knowledge that institutions will always choose survival over truth. The hotel erases what it hosted. When Wilde fell, every place that had sheltered him faced the same question: deny, destroy, or be next. The Wilde trials created panic in London's hospitality industry. Hotels realized that their discretion systems were now liabilities. Guest registers could be subpoenaed. Staff could be called as witnesses. Coded ledgers could be decoded by lawyers. Anything that proved a hotel had knowingly facilitated illegal behavior could result in prosecution, fines, or closure. The Langham's management responded the way every prudent business would. They conducted an audit, not of finances, but of risk. They reviewed what records existed, what staff knew, and what evidence could connect the hotel to anyone involved in the scandal. The official register was untouchable. It was a legal requirement. Guests signed it. The document sat on the front desk. Destroying it would invite more suspicion than keeping it. But the register only proved who stayed at the hotel. It did not prove what they did there. The second ledger was different. The one with coded entries. The one that tracked which rooms were rented under initials, which guests paid extra for privacy, which staff worked which shifts. That ledger was evidence, and evidence could be destroyed. The destruction would have been methodical, a page at a time, removed from the binding, burned in the manager's fireplace, the ashes scattered, no dramatic bonfire, no moment of decision, just quiet, systematic elimination. But people remember what paper does not. The staff who worked the unmarked suites knew what they had seen. The porters who carried luggage knew which guests arrived together. The desk clerks who handled payments knew which transactions were irregular. Memory could not be burned, so the hotel managed memory instead. Senior staff were promoted into roles where they no longer interacted with guests. Porters were transferred to day shifts. Maids were reassigned to public areas. The people who knew the most were moved away from positions where they could be questioned. Others were dismissed, not publicly, not with scandal. They were given references. They were told their positions were being eliminated due to restructuring. They were paid severance and asked to sign agreements that forbade them from discussing hotel business. A few refused to sign. They were let go without references. That made them unemployable in the hotel industry. It also made them angry. But angry former staff who talked without proof were dismissed as disgruntled. Their testimony was worthless without documentation. The hotel also tightened its policies. New guidelines prohibited staff from discussing guests by name, even internally. A guest became the gentleman in 417, never Mr. So and so. This made conversation harder, but memory less specific. If questioned, a maid could say she remembered cleaning a room, but not who occupied it. Rooms were renumbered. The unmarked suites, the ones that had been rented for privacy, were given new designations. The old numbers disappeared from floor plans. This created confusion. A witness might testify about room 423 in 1894, but the hotel could produce records showing that room 423 did not exist in 1894. The witness would seem unreliable. Their testimony would be dismissed. The Langham also reviewed its financial records. Payments for privacy premiums had been recorded vaguely, miscellaneous charges, incidental fees. The hotel rewrote the ledgers to make those entries even less specific. Gratuities paid to staff were recategorized as general operational costs. Nothing pointed to a system. Everything looked like standard business. This was not unique to the Langham. Every major hotel in London was doing the same thing. The Savoy, the Midland Grand, the Great Western. They all recognized that the Wilde case had created precedent, that prosecutors could use hotel records to build cases, that no establishment was safe if it could be connected to illegal activity. But the panic went beyond legal risk. It was also about reputation. The Langham had built its brand on luxury and respectability. Association with scandal would damage that brand. Wealthy clients would go elsewhere. Investors would withdraw. The hotel's value would collapse. So the hotel did what institutions do when faced with existential threat. It lied. Not overtly. Not in ways that could be proven false. It simply denied knowledge. When asked if Oscar Wilde had ever stayed at the Langham, the response was careful. The hotel hosted thousands of guests. Records from that period were incomplete. Staff turnover made verification difficult. The answer was always some version of, "We cannot confirm." This protected the hotel legally. It also protected Wilde in a strange way. Without records, prosecutors could not prove he had used the Langham for illegal meetings. The absence of evidence became evidence of nothing. But absence is not truth. It is erasure. And erasure is a choice. The Langham chose to erase its complicity. It chose to forget that it had profited from secrecy, that it had built systems to enable behavior the law called criminal, that it had been, in every practical sense, an accomplice. The hotel justified this as necessity, business survival, protecting innocent staff, preventing witch hunts, all of which was true, but it was also cowardice. The Langham could have admitted that it offered discretion, that discretion was legal, that the hotel was not responsible for how guests used their privacy. Instead, it pretended the system never existed. This set the pattern for how the hotel would handle its past. Whenever scandal threatened, the response was denial, destruction of records, reassignment of staff, rewriting of history. The Langham became expert at surviving by forgetting. The strategy worked. No charges were filed against the hotel. No lawsuits connected it to the Wilde case. The Langham continued to operate. It remained profitable. It remained respectable. The scandal passed, but the fear did not. Management became paranoid. They assumed they were being watched. They hired private security to identify potential blackmailers. They monitored staff for signs of disloyalty. They kept duplicate records off premises in case of raids. The hotel functioned as a fortress. This changed the business. The old system of unmarked suites and coded ledgers was abandoned, not because it was immoral, but because it was too dangerous. The Langham stopped offering guaranteed discretion. It stopped maintaining second ledgers. It stopped training staff to forget. This made the hotel safer legally. It also made it less useful to the clients who had valued its discretion. Those clients went elsewhere, to private clubs, to rented houses, to mistresses with apartments. The market for secrecy did not disappear, it just moved. The Langham replaced that clientele with a different kind of wealth: American tourists, European aristocrats, business travelers who wanted luxury but not scandal. The hotel repositioned itself as glamorous rather than discreet. The brand evolved. By 1900, the Langham had successfully distanced itself from the Wilde era. New staff had no memory of the old systems. New management had no knowledge of the destroyed records. The hotel presented itself as a place that had always been respectable, always legitimate, always clean. But buildings remember what people forget. The walls that had sheltered illegal meetings still stood. The corridors that servants had used to move guests invisibly were still there. The rooms where coded transactions had occurred were still being rented. The architecture of secrecy remained. And occasionally, the past surfaced. A former staff member would tell a story. A journalist would ask a question. A rumor would circulate. The hotel always responded the same way. Denial, deflection, we cannot confirm. The strategy was consistent. What the hotel never did was apologize, not for facilitating secrecy, not for destroying evidence, not for erasing its role in the lives of people who had relied on that secrecy. The Langham treated its past as a problem to be managed, not a truth to be acknowledged. That is the nature of institutional survival. Admit nothing. Protect the brand. Outlast the scandal. Let time do the work of forgetting. And if anyone asks, pretend you were never there. The Langham survived by becoming a cleaner story than the one it lived. And in doing so, it became complicit in the larger project of Victorian respectability. The project of pretending that the margins did not exist, that privacy was never purchased, that people like Oscar Wilde were aberrations, not products of the system that destroyed them. The hotel did not create that system, but it profited from it, and when the system collapsed, the hotel chose preservation over truth. That choice defined its legacy. Renovation dust and a buried archive. Old buildings confess during renovations, not because they want to, but because walls cannot keep secrets forever. In 1991, the Langham Hotel closed for a comprehensive renovation. The building had declined over decades. World War II had damaged it. Post-war neglect had worsened the decay. By the 1980s, the Langham was shabby, outdated, and losing money. The new owners decided to restore it to luxury. The project would cost £30 million and take 2 years. Renovation means stripping a building to its bones. Workers removed plaster. They gutted rooms. They replaced pipes and wiring. They uncovered layers of paint and wallpaper that told the story of a century of use. And sometimes, they found things that were meant to stay hidden. The alleged discovery happened in the spring of 1991. According to reports, a crew was working on the 4th floor, removing a section of wall in a service corridor. The wall was supposed to be solid brick behind the plaster. But when they broke through, one worker's chisel hit wood instead. The wood was a panel, approximately 2 feet wide, 3 feet tall. It had been plastered over, concealed so completely that no one knew it was there. The worker pried it loose. Behind it was a cavity, and inside the cavity, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of papers. The papers were ledger pages, guest lists, room numbers, dates from the 1880s and 1890s, and notations in a cramped hand using abbreviations and codes. The pages were brittle. They smelled of dust and decay, but they were legible. The worker who found them showed them to the site foreman. The foreman contacted the project manager. The project manager informed the hotel's ownership group. And then the story becomes murky. The papers were either examined and archived, or they were dismissed as irrelevant, or they vanished entirely. No one can agree. The hotel's official position is that no such documents were found. When journalists asked in subsequent years, the response was consistent. Renovations did uncover historical artifacts, old menus, photographs, receipts, but no ledgers, no guest lists, nothing that substantiated the rumor. Yet the rumor persists. Workers from the renovation crew told friends. Those friends told others. The story circulated in the construction industry, then reached historians, then journalists. By the mid-1990s, the claim of a hidden archive had become part of the Langham's mythology. If the documents existed, what did they prove? The obvious answer is that they were part of the second ledger system, the hidden records of unmarked suites, the coded notations about which guests paid for discretion, the evidence that the hotel had operated the way everyone suspected. But rumors exaggerate. The actual documents, if they existed, might have been mundane. Old accounting records, staff rosters, maintenance logs, the kind of paperwork that accumulates in any business and gets filed away when new management takes over. Concealing them behind a wall might have been an accident. A renovation in the 1920s might have sealed off an old storage cavity without realizing anything was inside. Or the concealment might have been deliberate. After the Wilde trials, the Langham would have had strong motivation to hide sensitive records. Destroying them was safest, but destruction leaves no insurance. Hidden records could be retrieved if needed to prove innocence or rebut accusations. They could be used as leverage if someone threatened the hotel. Hiding them was a compromise between security and utility. But why leave them in a wall? Why not store them in a solicitor's office under client privilege? The answer might be paranoia. A solicitor could be subpoenaed. An archive could be raided. But a wall in a service corridor, plastered over and forgotten, was invisible. It was the ultimate secure location, until renovations made it visible. The workers who allegedly found the papers described them as fragmentary. Not a complete ledger, but sections. Pages that had been removed from a bound book and hidden separately. This suggests someone had selected specific pages, the most dangerous entries, the ones that could implicate the hotel or its guests. The codes on the pages were supposedly simple: initials for names, numbers for rooms, abbreviations for services, paid through, usual arrangement, discretion required. The notations were vague enough to deny criminal intent, but specific enough to operate a system. If the pages were authentic, they would have been historically significant. They would have documented how Victorian hotels managed privacy, how they balanced legal requirements with client needs, how they profited from secrecy. The papers would have been evidence for researchers studying sexuality, criminality, and social control in the 1880s. But authentication would have been difficult. Paper can be dated, but that only proves the material is from the period. Handwriting can be analyzed, but without exemplars to compare, analysis is speculative. The codes would need to be decoded using context clues, and that process would involve assumptions. The hotel had every reason to dismiss the documents as fake. Authenticating them would invite scrutiny. It would raise questions about what else might be hidden. It would connect the Langham to scandals it had spent a century distancing itself from. Easier to deny, easier to say nothing was found. But if nothing was found, why does the rumor persist? Why do multiple people claim to have seen the papers? Why did the story spread so widely? The answer might be that something was found, but not what the rumors claim. Perhaps workers found old records that were mundane, but looked suspicious. Perhaps someone saw papers being removed and assumed they were being hidden. Perhaps the hotel did find documents, but immediately destroyed them to avoid complications. Or perhaps the whole story is fabrication. Renovations are chaotic. Workers tell stories. Journalists love mysteries. The Langham is famous. Wilde is famous. The combination creates a perfect narrative, a hidden archive, secret records, Victorian scandal. It is too good not to repeat. The truth is unknowable without the documents. And the documents, if they ever existed, are gone. The hotel says they were never found. No archive holds them. No museum displays them. No historian has examined them. They exist only in rumor, but rumor is a kind of truth. It tells us what people believe, what they want to believe. The idea that the Langham kept hidden records fits the story we know about Victorian hotels, about discretion and complicity, about systems built to enable behavior the law forbade. The rumor persists because it makes sense, and maybe that is enough. Maybe the hidden archive does not need to be real to be true. It represents the evidence that must have existed, the records that would have been kept, the paper trail that would have been too dangerous to leave intact. The documents are not proof, they are metaphor. The Langham's renovation was completed in 1993. The hotel reopened as a luxury destination. The restoration was praised. The building was beautiful again. The brand was restored. The past was safely in the past. But the rumor did not die. It became part of the hotel's mystique. Tours mention it. Guests ask about it. The hotel neither confirms nor denies, which keeps the story alive. And perhaps that is the hotel's final strategy. Let the rumor exist. Let it add intrigue, but never provide proof. Never give the story enough substance to become scandal. The wall that hid the papers, if they existed, is gone now. The cavity was filled. New plaster was applied. The corridor looks the same as every other corridor. There is no plaque, no marker, no acknowledgement that anything was ever there. Because that is how buildings keep secrets, not by hiding them perfectly, but by destroying the evidence and letting time do the rest. Ghost stories, gaslight, and paper trails. The Langham is famous for luxury and infamous for hauntings, which is another way of saying it remembers. The hotel has ghost stories, dozens of them. Guests report seeing figures in Victorian clothing. Staff describe cold spots in hallways. Maintenance workers hear voices in empty rooms. The stories are consistent enough to suggest pattern, but vague enough to resist explanation. Room 333 is the most famous. According to legend, a German prince stayed there in the 1860s. He died in the room under mysterious circumstances. His ghost supposedly appears to guests, standing at the foot of the bed, dressed in formal military attire. The story has variations. Some say the prince committed suicide. Others claim he was murdered. Some versions mention a woman involved. Others say he died alone. The details shift, but the core remains. Room 333 is haunted. Guests feel watched. Some refuse to stay there. But ghosts are easier to believe than history. Hauntings offer mystery without responsibility. They let us acknowledge that something happened without confronting what it was. A ghost is tragedy made decorative. Pain turned into entertainment. Consider what we know about room 333. Victorian hotels did have deaths. Guests died from illness, injury, suicide. The Langham operated for decades. Statistically, someone died there. Possibly multiple people. Possibly in room 333. But the ghost story erases the human details. It does not ask why the prince was staying alone, why he might have been desperate, what pressures he faced. It turns him into an apparition, a narrative device, a reason to book the room and feel a thrill. Other ghost stories follow the same pattern. A Victorian woman in a crinoline dress walks the third floor. She is described as sad, ethereal, searching. No one knows who she was or what she wants. She exists to be seen and wondered about. A man in evening clothes appears in the basement. He is always near the old kitchens. Staff report feeling a presence. Items move. Lights flicker. The man is interpreted as a former guest, or perhaps a servant. The ambiguity is part of the appeal. The Langham leans into these stories. The hotel's marketing mentions them. Tour guides reference them. The hauntings are framed as part of the building's charm. A luxury hotel with a mysterious past, history you can sleep in. But hauntings are often grief. They are trauma that has not been processed. They are stories that were never told. If the Langham is haunted, it is haunted by the people who lived in its margins, the men who rented rooms they could not name, the servants who witnessed things they were paid to forget, the guests who left through side doors because the front entrance was too dangerous. These people do not get ghost stories, they get erasure. Their names were removed from ledgers. Their presence was denied. Their lives were reduced to codes and notations and eventually burned away. If they linger, it is because the building never acknowledged them. The paranormal explanations for the hauntings are familiar. Residual energy, emotional imprints, spirits trapped between worlds. These explanations are comforting because they remove agency. The building is not responsible. The ghosts are just there, acting out their loops beyond anyone's control. But there are mundane explanations too. Old buildings settle, wood creaks, pipes knock, drafts move through corridors. Guests in unfamiliar places hear sounds they cannot identify and interpret them as supernatural. The mind fills gaps with ghosts. Suggestion plays a role. A guest who knows room 333 is haunted will notice things they would otherwise ignore. A shadow becomes a figure. A draft becomes a presence. The story creates the experience. Staff who work late shifts are especially susceptible. Empty hotels are eerie. Long corridors, dim lighting, silence broken by sudden noise. The environment primes people to feel watched. Add the building's history, and every unexplained sound becomes evidence of haunting. But some experiences resist easy dismissal. Multiple guests reporting the same figure in the same room. Staff who knew nothing about the ghost stories describing identical experiences. Consistent details across decades. These patterns suggest something more than imagination, that something might be architectural. Room 333 might have features that create sensory effects. A mirror positioned to catch reflections from the hallway. A vent that carries sound from other floors. A window that creates light patterns. The room itself could be generating the experiences that guests interpret as haunting, or the something might be intentional, Staff who know the ghost stories might unconsciously recreate them. A porter who mentions the haunting plants, the idea in a guest's mind. That guest sees something ambiguous and interprets it through the lens of the story they were told. The haunting is real because people believe it should be. The Langham does not investigate. It does not bring in researchers to test electromagnetic fields or record overnight. It does not analyze the architecture for prosaic explanations. The hotel benefits from the ambiguity. Confirmed hauntings are silly. Debunked hauntings are disappointing. Unresolved hauntings are intriguing. But the hauntings also serve a function. They redirect attention. Guests focus on ghosts instead of history. They wonder about the German prince instead of asking about Oscar Wilde. The paranormal stories obscure the human ones. The building's complicity is transformed into mystery. This is how respectability works in the modern era. Acknowledge the past, but make it entertainment. Turn scandal into tourism. Let people feel a thrill without confronting the truth. The Langham is haunted, yes, but by what? Not by ghosts, by the decisions it made, by the records it destroyed, by the silence it sold. The hauntings are metaphor. They represent return. The things the hotel tried to bury are surfacing, not as evidence, as feeling, as atmosphere, as the vague sense that something happened here. Something the walls remember even if the ledgers do not. And maybe that is appropriate. Maybe buildings should be haunted by their complicity. Maybe the discomfort guests feel in room 333 is the only justice the people who were erased will ever get. Not acknowledgement, just unease. The knowledge that this place is not as innocent as it looks. The ghost stories will continue. New guests will report seeing the German prince. Staff will feel presences. The hotel will nod and smile and neither confirm nor deny. And the real ghosts, the ones without names or stories or legends, will remain invisible, just as they were when they were alive. What we perform to feel safe. The darkest part of this story is not what happened in private rooms, but how easily the public pretended not to know. The Langham still operates today. It is owned by a luxury hotel group. Rooms cost between £600 and £2,000 per night. The hotel hosts weddings, conferences, and visiting dignitaries. It markets itself as an icon of London elegance. Its tagline emphasizes heritage and sophistication. The past is a selling point, but the past that is sold is curated. The Langham celebrates its royal guests, its famous visitors, its architectural grandeur. It mentions Oscar Wilde in passing as one of many notable figures who stayed there. The hotel does not mention that Wilde might have used it for the privacy that eventually destroyed him. That detail is too complicated for brochures. This is not dishonesty. It is branding. Every institution does it. Museums display artifacts without showing the violence that produced them. Cities build monuments without acknowledging the labor that made them possible. Hotels offer luxury without discussing the systems that maintain it. We curate the past to make it comfortable, but something is lost in that comfort. The truth that the Langham and places like it were built on complicity. That discretion was a product because society criminalized private life, that the hotel profited from fear, that respectability was always a performance with infrastructure behind it. The Victorian era is easy to judge from a distance. We see its hypocrisies clearly. Men who preached morality while keeping mistresses. Laws that policed intimacy while ignoring abuse. A society that valued appearances over truth. We feel superior to it. We believe we have evolved. But the mechanisms are still here. We still police what is acceptable. We still demand performance. We still punish people for failing to hide. The technology has changed. The surveillance is digital. The consequences are different, but the structure remains. Society functions by creating categories of acceptable and unacceptable, and then punishing anyone who crosses the line. The Langham is a case study in how institutions survive by adapting their complicity. In the Victorian era, the hotel offered physical privacy, unmarked suites, trained staff, hidden ledgers. Today it offers different kinds of privacy: secure communications, encrypted transactions, non-disclosure agreements. The product has changed, but the principle has not. Privacy is still something you purchase, and institutions still profit from managing secrets. The difference is that modern privacy claims to be neutral. Hotels say they protect all guests equally. They frame discretion as a luxury service, not a moral compromise. But neutrality is a fiction. The guests who need privacy the most are the ones with the most to lose. The ones whose lives are still prosecuted by law or public opinion. The ones who would be destroyed if their secrets were revealed. The Langham no longer maintains hidden ledgers. It no longer trains staff to forget. But it still knows which guests require special handling, which rooms are booked through lawyers, which visitors prefer to avoid the front entrance. The systems are more sophisticated, the documentation is digital, the complicity is legal, but it is still complicity. And when scandal strikes, the response is still the same. Deny knowledge, protect the brand, destroy evidence, let time do the forgetting. The hotel has had over a century to perfect this strategy. It works, but this is not a story about the Langham. It is a story about what we accept. We accept that privacy has a price. We accept that institutions will protect themselves over individuals. We accept that history will be rewritten to make it palatable. We accept these things because the alternative is confronting how much of modern life depends on agreed-upon silence. The Wilde trials revealed that secret. They showed that Victorian respectability was a lie, that the grand hotels and gentlemen's clubs and drawing rooms were stages for performance, that everyone knew what was happening and everyone pretended not to know. And when Wilde forced the truth into public, society punished him for breaking the agreement. We are still operating under that agreement. We know that powerful people bend rules. We know that institutions enable bad behavior. We know that privacy is purchased and silence is sold. But we pretend not to know. We perform ignorance. Because confronting the truth means confronting our own complicity. The Langham is not a villain in this story. It is a mirror. It reflects what we are willing to accept, what we are willing to ignore, what we are willing to pay for. The hotel gave Victorian society exactly what it wanted, a place where private life could exist without becoming public scandal, a system that made hypocrisy possible. And when that system was exposed, the hotel did what we all do. It denied, it erased, it survived. Because institutions always survive. They outlast individuals. They outlast scandals. They adapt to new moral frameworks while preserving the same underlying functions. The question is not whether the Langham was complicit. It was. The question is what we do with that complicity. Do we acknowledge it? Do we learn from it? Or do we turn it into ghost stories and tourist attractions? Do we make the past entertaining so we do not have to confront it? The hotel has chosen entertainment, the hauntings, the rumors of hidden ledgers, the suggestion of Victorian scandal. It is all packaged as mystique, as heritage, as something that happened long ago and has nothing to do with today. The past is safe because it is distant. It does not implicate us. But the past is not distant. The same mechanisms that destroyed Oscar Wilde are still operating. The same institutions that profited from his discretion are still profiting. The same public that demanded his punishment still demands punishment for anyone who refuses to perform respectability. The architecture has changed. The principles have not. The Langham will continue to operate. It will continue to host guests who need privacy. It will continue to profit from discretion, and it will continue to curate its history to make it marketable. This is not failure. This is success. The hotel has mastered the art of survival through selective memory, and we will continue to accept it. We will book rooms. We will admire the chandeliers. We will hear the ghost stories and feel a pleasant thrill. We will pretend that the building's past is separate from its present, that history is something that happened to other people, that we are not complicit in the systems we inherit, but we are. Every time we pay for privacy, we are buying what the Langham sold in 1885. Every time we accept institutional denials, we are enabling erasure. Every time we turn scandal into entertainment, we are performing the same respectability that Victorian society performed. We are the ones keeping the system alive. The darkest part of this story is not what happened in private rooms at the Langham. It is that we know what happened. We know how society policed intimacy. We know how institutions enabled that policing. We know how money bought silence and silence bought survival. We know all of this, and we pretend we do not, because pretending is easier than changing. Respectability is still a performance. The stage has gotten bigger. The audience has changed, but the script is the same. We are all actors. We all know our lines, and we all agree, without ever saying it, that the performance must continue. Because the alternative is admitting that the walls we live behind are just as complicit as the walls of the Langham, that our privacy is just as purchased, that our secrets are just as managed, that we are not free. We are just better at hiding. The Langham is not a scandal from the past. It is a lesson for the present, about what we build, about what we protect, about what we are willing to forget in order to feel respectable. The hotel endures because we need it to, because confronting what it represents means confronting what we are. And that is a truth too uncomfortable to acknowledge. So we turn it into a ghost story instead. We make it decorative, we make it safe, we make it something that haunts other people. Never us. But the ghosts are ours, the secrets are ours, the complicity is ours. And until we stop performing respectability long enough to face that truth, we will keep rebuilding the Langham over and over in different forms, with different names, but always the same architecture, always the same bargain, always the same lie. That privacy can be bought, that silence can be sold, that respectability can be performed, and that none of it has a cost. It does. Oscar Wilde paid it. So did everyone who relied on the systems that destroyed him. So do we, every day, in ways we refuse to see, because seeing would require us to stop pretending, and pretending is what keeps the walls standing, what keeps the doors locked, what keeps the secrets safe, what keeps us respectable, even when respectability is nothing more than agreed upon silence about what we all know is true. The Langham remembers, even if we do not, even if we will not. The walls remember, and someday perhaps we will stop performing long enough to listen, to hear what the building has been trying to tell us for over a century. That respectability is a lie, that privacy is a product, that secrecy is complicity, and that the ghosts we refuse to acknowledge are just the truth waiting for us to be brave enough to speak it. Until then, the hotel will endure, beautiful, elegant, respectable, and silent.